During the evening of May 7th, Major General George Pickett, commanding the defenses of Petersburg, ordered Brigadier General Johnson to abandon Port Walthall Junction and move south to defensive positions behind Swift Creek. Although the Confederate forces had been bolstered to 3,500 rifles with the arrival of Haygood's reinforcements, the two brigades were still in a difficult position. At the railroad line at Port Walthall Junction, both flanks were exposed and vulnerable, with the nearest Confederate reinforcements north of Drury's Bluff and to the south in Petersburg. In addition, they still faced a potential 10-1 disadvantage in numbers. Fearing an attack on Petersburg from City Point, General Pickett twice suggested and then finally ordered Johnson back to the Swift Creek position. Stopping at the Fort Clifton Civil War Trails site, there's some earthworks down here. It was part of the Fort Clifton site itself, which is pretty neat. This is all part of that Battle of Swift Creek that we were talking about earlier, and the fortification that's out here just happens to be the one Confederate fortification in the area that pretty much wasn't surrendered. It never changed hands. It was created in 1862, and then by 1864, the fortifications and the rifle pits and everything along the Swift Creek and the flanks, they were complete and ready. The heaviest fighting in this location came May 9th, and that's when Butler and his men decided to probe the area and try to hit the Confederates out here on the flanks of Swift Creek. But they were repelled pretty quickly. Fortunately for them, this is a pretty strong position for them to be in. This area out here, it's pretty unique. We're going to take a look at these earthworks that are here on the riverbank and see if we can see maybe some of the rifle pits too. These large banks right here just behind me, this is part of that Fort Clifton that we're talking about. Fortifications are pretty huge, and it's just behind a elementary school. It's an odd place for something like this, a machine of war, if you will. But very quiet out here, and out in front of me appears to be kind of a swampy location, a low bottom area. And then just off in the distance, you can see what looks like a body of water. Can't really see too far from here though. Probably gonna have to go back up top here to the fort itself, or the banks of the fort, and see what's down there. Now this fort was held all the way up until April 2nd of 1865, when the area was completely evacuated. Once it was evacuated, the powder magazine was blown up, and the 14 guns that were on the inside were spiked. The fort was pretty much made useless at that point. And the forces that were out here fighting and defending this location for so long end up on the run with Robert E. Lee and his army. And eventually they surrender at Appomattox with the main forces. So there's a nice pathway that takes you out here to the river that's behind me from the fort. Now, inside that fort, during that attack that we were talking about with Swift Creek, there was a gunboat that came up the river, and it went to attack the fort itself. And they were trying to knock out the defenses, essentially, and then hit them from all sides and maybe overwhelm the troops in the area. The fort was successful at actually destroying and sinking that ship that came up through here. The crew actually had to scuttle the ship. That was a pretty significant situation for any of the forts, because the majority of the Confederate forts that are out in these areas were not very successful with gunboats. There was a lot of back and forth in those days with the fighting, but the positions weren't as defensible. All in my front here, the fort and its works are built up on the high ridges in front of me, the bank. And then to the left and to the right, there are rifle pits that run along the Swift Creek to guard on the flank. So that meant that any position that you came towards in this direction across the river, from the left, from the right, trying to attack this location, you were not going to be successful. It is a very quiet and peaceful place. It's kind of strange that such a violent place sits right behind an elementary school in Petersburg, Virginia. Very easy to see, looking in the background here, at just how tall these earthworks still are out here at this fort. Next, we're going to move over to where the actual action took place by Swift Creek on that battle in May of 1864. But this is a pretty amazing stop. You can tell hardly anybody comes out here to visit this place. It's one of those locations, and it almost feels like you discover it when you get out here, but you know you didn't. You should definitely come out and check this place out before it withers away into the dirt. So on the sign that's out here right in front of the fort, it details the fight that took place here. During that same attack over at Swift Creek, 5 Union gunboats would end up out there on the river, attacking this location and trying to get past it. 5 Union gunboats would be repulsed. Samuel L. Brewster was one of those gunboats, and just like we talked about, one of the gunboats being scuttled, that was the actual gunboat that was attacked and hit and had to be scuttled. The crews inside here were successful again on June 16th of 1864, which was the last actual offensive of the Union trying to come past this fort. Again, the gunboats were repulsed and the Confederates were able to maintain this location. It's a pretty good defensible area. It has a really good record as far as the defenders inside this fort. The fort itself even boasts a women's quarters, a place for women to stay inside of this area too. It's pretty neat how large and open and expansive this location is, and what all used to be built and sitting inside the area that I'm standing at right now. The majority of it's gone now, but there are very large earthworks here to still see today. Today we're out at a battlefield location called Swift Creek here in Petersburg. There's a Civil War trail sign up here that details the actions that took place out here. In May of 1864, Benjamin Butler's men were out here demonstrating, and the Confederates were across the way seeing what was happening. And the whole point was to take the turnpike back here behind us and the railroad and destroy it and keep it from being usable by the Confederate Army out here. Well, the Confederate Army, the portion of it under Bushrod Johnson, came in this direction. The 11th South Carolina was the first unit on the scene because the 11th South Carolina was essentially ahead of its lines, and they met and made contact here where the bridge would have been, here at this river or this creek. Eventually the 21st South Carolina comes up and they charge headlong into the Union soldiers just behind me here, up the turnpike straight ahead. When the men opened up, they butchered South Carolinians left and right. South Carolinians fell everywhere, and the post-battle report proved as much. Eventually, the South Carolinians and the Confederates had to fall back across this creek that's directly in front of me here and make their way back to their lines. Butler's men came down to this creek bank where I'm at right now, and they placed cannons out here along this creek bank. But the 63rd Tennessee came out here, and they were able to drive those Union soldiers back further up the hill behind me. Eventually, Benjamin Butler and his men left the area, and the Confederates had the portion of the railroad that was destroyed repaired within a day. On the afternoon of May 9th, Butler met with Smith and Gilmore to develop a plan for the next day's operations. Butler decided to continue to threaten Petersburg by forcing a break in the Confederate defenses at Swift Creek and advancing south to the Appomattox River. Butler then returned to his headquarters at Point of Rocks. Shortly after Butler's departure, Gilmore and Smith devised an alternative plan to bypass the Confederates at Swift Creek. They proposed to withdraw back to their defenses at Bermuda Hundred and construct a pontoon bridge near Cobb's Hill. This would allow them to cross the Appomattox River, bypass the Confederates at Swift Creek, and advance directly towards Petersburg. Many of the places that you see in this video are easily accessible, and they're within park boundaries, state parks, city parks, and signs are up from the Civil War Trails organization that helps you to easily identify where these places are and what took place there. Coming up here in the future, we're going to have more videos from the Bermuda Hundred. We're going to try to take a look at the First Battle of Port Walthall. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.